Pound the echoes of Scratch Creek, pound 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 Act 1. The highway to nowhere. Some decisions carry a subtle, ominous weight long before their consequences manifest. For Marcus and Tessa, that decision was departure time. It was a damp, suffocating Tuesday evening in late September. Marcus had secured a promising engineering post in Washington state, promising a fresh start away from the friction of their old city life. Their belongings were packed into a rented moving truck, and their personal sedan, a trusty but aging vehicle, was prepped for the cross-country trek. Tessa had urged caution earlier that day, suggesting they sleep through the night and set off at sunrise. But Marcus, driven by a stubborn mix of momentum and pride after a late night drinking with old neighbors, insisted they hit the road immediately. "We'll beat the morning rush," Marcus assured her, gripping the steering wheel as the windshield wipers scraped rhythmically against the glass. 6, maybe 7 hours of night driving, and we're practically there. Tessa leaned her head against the cool passenger window, watching the streetlights dissolve into continuous streaks of amber and white. By 8 p.m., the familiar skyline had vanished, swallowed by the imposing, monolithic shadows of the Pacific Northwest pine forests. Around 2 hours into the journey, the primary navigation display glitched. A harsh synthetic chime tone echoed through the cabin as the GPS recalculated, flagging a major traffic backup along the main interstate highway due to an overturned tanker. The system rerouted them off the multi-lane freeway onto a secondary state route, a narrow, poorly lit vein cutting directly through the dense timberlands of Ironbark State Park. The transition was immediate and unsettling. The smooth asphalt gave way to cracked, uneven pavement flanked by aggressive, towering evergreens whose boughs arched overhead like interlocking ribs. The weather worsened rapidly. Cold mountain rain turned into a whipping, low-lying fog that clung to the asphalt in thick, spectral tendrils. 10 miles down the secondary road, a massive Douglas fir blocked both lanes, its shattered root base testifying to a recent high wind shear. "Great," Tessa muttered, sitting upright. "Just great, Marcus. Relax, it's fine. Grab the flashlight." Marcus shifted the car into park, leaving the high beams cutting through the mist. Together, they stepped out into the freezing air. The woods were suffocatingly quiet. No crickets, no rustling wildlife, only the heavy, wet drip of rainwater falling from high canopy needles. Working together, their boots slipping on mud, they managed to leverage a smaller segment of the fallen tree, dragging it onto the shoulder just far enough to clear a narrow passage for their vehicle. As Marcus wiped grease and tree bark from his palms, he glanced toward the tree line. For a fraction of a second, beam light caught a reflection deep between the trunks, a still, dark silhouette standing perfectly unbothered by the rain. Before he could focus, the figure vanished behind the dense underbrush. Marcus said nothing to Tessa, convincing himself it was merely an optical illusion caused by fatigue and moving shadows. They drove on. A few miles further, running low on fuel, they spotted the rusted neon sign of an abandoned service station rotting beside a darkened junction. Desperate for a stretch, Marcus pulled in near the decommissioned pumps. Out of the gloom stepped a middle-aged man wearing a oil-stained jacket. He stood under the overhang, chewing methodically on a wooden toothpick, watching their arrival with unconcealed disdain. "Station's been closed since '98. The man spat out before Marcus could speak. His eyes lingered on Marcus' dark skin, narrowing into a look of cold, localized malice. "You folks are way off the beaten trail. Strangers don't usually last long out here after dark." "Just checking the map," Marcus replied coolly, keeping his voice neutral while feeling Tessa's nervous grip on his forearm. "Move along," the man snapped, turning his back on them, and retreating into the shadowy interior of the derelict building. They left without another word, but the atmosphere inside the car had curdled into palpable tension. Asterisk 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 pound 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 Act 2. The pit stop in Scratch Creek. The road began a steep incline into the foothills. The car's engine began to whine unnaturally, a high-pitched metallic friction that vibrated through the floorboards. On the dashboard, a red warning indicator flashed erratically, high engine temperature. "Marcus, what's that noise?" Tessa asked, her voice tight. "Overheating." Marcus gritted his teeth, feathering the accelerator. The fan belt or radiator line must have caught debris back at the fallen tree before he could pull over. A pair of aggressive blinding headlights flared in their rearview mirror. A battered dark pickup truck aggressively tailgated them up the grade, its horn blaring continuously in long, deafening blasts. The driver didn't care about their mechanical failure. He wanted them off his road. As the slope leveled out, the pickup swerved wildly onto the unpaved shoulder, kicking up gravel and swerving inches from their front bumper, before speeding off into the dark. Steam was now pouring from under the sedan's hood. Ahead lay a dim cluster of structures, marked by a decaying wooden archway. "Welcome to Scratch Creek," Marcus coasted the smoking car into an old 24-hour service garage at the edge of the hamlet. A young technician named Harry was outside, locking up the bays. Seeing their plight, Harry approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Looks like your coolant hose popped," Harry said after popping the latch and inspecting the hissed vapor inside the bay. "Easy fix. Honestly, I've got a spare clamp and hose in the shop. Give me 20 minutes. Tessa let out a sigh of relief, but the relief was short-lived. An older, broad-shouldered man with gray hair and severe facial scars, later identified as Pete, stepped out from the garage office. Pete glared at Harry, then at the couple. He leaned in close to Harry, whispering something sharply into the boy's ear. Harry's posture instantly stiffened. When he turned back to Marcus, his friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by anxious, averted eyes. "Actually, I can't do it tonight," Harry stammered, looking at the concrete floor. "Shop's officially closed. I don't have the key to the parts inventory." "You just said you had the hose," Marcus protested. Steps forward. Pete stepped between them, his posture imposing. "The boy misspoke, but if you can crawl that rust bucket another half-mile down the creek road, Bill's mechanic shop is behind his house. He might have what you need, or he might not. Either way, don't linger around these pumps." Left with no choice, Marcus limped the steaming car down the isolated dirt track Pete indicated. They found Bill's property, a cluttered yard filled with stripped vehicle frames and rusted farm equipment. When Marcus knocked on the porch door, a defensive middle-aged woman answered, holding a porch light like a weapon. She initially accused them of being door-to-door proselytizers, but after Marcus gestured to the dead vehicle smoking on her driveway, she grudgingly called for her husband. Bill emerged, a thin, reeking man with sun-cured skin and a Confederate flag patch pinned to his work vest. He walked around their car, kicking a tire dismissively. "Radiator's cooked," Bill declared. "Can't touch it till tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Not a minute earlier. Is there anywhere we can stay?" Tessa asked, wrapping her coat tighter around herself. "A motel." Bill gestured vaguely back toward the main road. "Julia runs the old Scratch Creek Lodge down by the historic chapel. She might have a room. You can walk it. Leave the keys in the ignition so I can drag it into the bay come sunup." As they began the quarter-mile walk down the dark, unlit road toward the lodge, Tessa finally snapped. "This is crazy, Marcus. Look around us. The people here are hostile. The car breaks down out of nowhere, and you're just following every strange instruction these hillbillies give you. We should have stayed in the car." "Stayed in a broken car in sub-zero woods," Marcus countered, frustration bubbling over. "I'm trying to keep us safe and get this fixed so we can leave at first light." "You're not listening to me," Tessa cried out. "Something is wrong with this place." Pound 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 Act 3, The Scratch Creek Lodge. The Scratch Creek Lodge was an imposing two-story Victorian timber structure with dark wrap-around verandas, situated right at the edge of a dense cemetery that bordered an ancient stone chapel. They were greeted at the door by Julia, an elderly woman whose polite, maternal voice stood in stark contrast to the rest of the town's residents. She offered them a room on the second floor at a surprisingly low rate, offering warm tea and dry towels. However, as she walked them up the creaking staircase, she pointed to a heavily bolted wooden door at the far end of the ground floor hallway. "Guest rooms are strictly upstairs," Julia said, her voice turning unusually flat. "That lower wing contains our private family archives and maintenance supplies. It remains locked at all times. Please do not attempt to enter." While Marcus went into the small bathroom to wash off the grime, Tessa waited near the stairwell. Suddenly, the quiet was shattered by heavy, frantic footsteps coming down from the third-floor staff quarters. A young African-American man, his clothes torn and his eyes wide with sheer panic, stumbled down the stairs. He looked at Tessa with unseeing terror, muttering frantic warnings under his breath. Asterisk, "They're choosing. They're setting up the stakes, run while you can." Asterisk. Before Tessa could speak, the man slammed through the front entrance door and sprinted out into the dark forest. When Marcus emerged from the bathroom, Tessa was shaking. She explained what she had just witnessed, but Marcus, exhausted to the bone, rationalized it as a local drifter, or someone suffering a mental breakdown. "Tessa, please. We have a bed. We have heat. Let's just rest." It was then that Tessa noticed there were no clean towels in their room. Annoyed, Marcus called down to the front desk using the internal landline. Julia answered. Asterisk, my apologies, dear. The housekeeping staff has already departed for the night, but if you need fresh linens, there is a secondary storage locker in the cellar underneath the old chapel out back. Take the rear courtyard exit across the garden. The key is hanging right inside the chapel door. Asterisk. It sounded convoluted, but Marcus, wanting to resolve the issue quickly, agreed to fetch them. He stepped out the rear door into the freezing night air. The path led through the old graveyard, where weathered stone markers stood askew in the high grass. The old chapel was pitch black inside. Marcus found the cellar key hanging on a rusty nail near the altar, opened the heavy storm doors behind the chapel, and descended into the damp, earth-scented cellar. He found a crate of clean towels near a row of wooden wine racks. But as he turned to leave, a loud asterisk clang asterisk echoed through the basement. The heavy wooden storm doors above had been slammed shut and locked from the outside. Marcus threw his weight against the wood, but it was solid oak. He pulled out his phone. No service. Trapped in the dark, he turned his flashlight toward the back of the cellar, searching for another exit. Behind a row of rotting storage barrels, he discovered a narrow, hand-dug tunnel stretching deep into the earth. The air inside smelled of wet clay and old decay. With no other option, Marcus crouched and navigated the tunnel. As he emerged through a hidden panel on the other end, he found himself standing inside a dimly lit hallway, the forbidden wing of the lodge Julia had explicitly told them to avoid. Before he could process his location, a man wearing a thick hunting coat and carrying a lantern turned the corner. It was one of the lodge's night caretakers. "What are you doing down here?" the man demanded, his hand moving toward his belt. Marcus held up his hands. "I was locked in the cellar across the yard. I was just looking for a way back." The caretaker stared at Marcus with a chilling, cold silence. He didn't answer, didn't offer help. He simply stepped aside, gesturing aggressively toward the main lobby stairs. Marcus didn't wait. He hurried back to room 204. Meanwhile, back in the room, Tessa had experienced her own nightmare. While Marcus was gone, someone had knocked heavily on the door. "Towel delivery," a raspy male voice had called out. "My boyfriend went to get them," Tessa had answered through the locked wood, her heart pounding. "Go away." The handle had jiggled violently. "Open the door, miss. Manager's orders." Tessa had backed away, gripping a heavy brass lamp, until the knocking finally stopped. When Marcus burst back into the room, Tessa ran to him. Marcus decided not to tell her about the subterranean tunnel connecting the chapel to the lodge's forbidden basement. He knew if he told her about the grave-like passages and the locked doors, panic would overwhelm her completely. "We need to check informally," Marcus lied smoothly, trying to maintain calm. "I forgot to sign the ledger downstairs." "I'll go down, sign it, get some water, and then we lock the door for the night." Downstairs at the desk, Tessa, who insisted on coming down with him, confronted Julia about the mysterious male employee who had tried to enter their room. Julia looked surprised, but her eyes glinted with subtle deceit. "Dear, as I told your partner, all male staff left at 8. No one should have been at your door. Perhaps you misheard." Tessa stared at Julia, knowing with absolute certainty that the woman was lying. Act 4. The Cult of the Old Stock Temple. By 3 a.m., the cold had set deep into the room. Tessa woke up with a dry, painful throat and a shivering chill. Unable to sleep, she slipped quietly out of bed to find a glass of water from the lobby's dispenser. As she descended the dark wooden stairs, she caught the faint sound of voices, coming from Julia's private office behind the reception desk. The door was cracked open a fraction of an inch, spilling a sliver of warm yellow light across the carpet. Tessa pressed her back against the wall, holding her breath, and peered through the gap. "The girl is awake and suspicious," Julia was saying in a low, cold tone. "And the boy found the lower pass under the cemetery." "It doesn't matter," the man in the uniform replied, his voice heavy with authority. "The star sets in 2 hours. The clearing is prepared. We lost the first specimen from the upper room. The old traditions require a replacement before dawn. The old stock covenant must be satisfied." "The boy will do," Bill added, a grim smirk on his face. "No one knows they took this back road." The interstate detour was logged as a system error. Tessa's blood ran cold. Horror hit her like a physical blow. The town wasn't just hostile, it was a coordinated trap. The road closure, the broken car, the isolated lodge, every single step had been engineered to funnel them into this valley. She turned to sprint back upstairs, but her foot hit a creaking floorboard. Inside the room, the voices stopped instantly. Tessa bolted up the stairs, throwing open the door to room 204. "Marcus, wake up. We have to go now." Marcus sat up, disoriented. What happened?" Before she could answer, a shadow crossed the window. Looking toward the bathroom, Marcus froze. The bathroom window had been pried open from the fire escape outside. Standing in the doorway of their bathroom was a tall man wearing a carved wooden mask and holding a heavy iron bar. "Under the bed," Marcus yelled, shoving Tessa down just as the intruder swung. Marcus scrambled beneath the frame beside her. They held their breath, watching the intruder's muddy boots move slowly around the mattress. The man kicked the closet door open, then paused. Taking advantage of his turned back, Marcus grabbed Tessa's hand. They slid out from the opposite side, burst into the hallway, and slammed the heavy oak door shut, jamming a wooden chair under the handle from the outside. They ran down the emergency stairwell, taking 2 steps at a time. Behind them, shouts echoed through the lodge's corridors. Bursting out into the icy rain, they ran blindly through the cemetery, tearing through briars and mud toward the road that led back to Bill's repair yard. When they arrived at the yard, breathless and soaked, they saw Bill's house illuminated by torches. Standing on the porch were several town residents, all wearing matching dark hooded garments, the members of the old stock temple. Bill was talking to a man in a deputy sheriff's uniform, the same man Tessa had seen in Julia's office. Their car was still parked near the bay, the keys still in the ignition as Bill had instructed. "We have 1 shot," Marcus whispered, his teeth chattering from fear and cold. Using the darkness of the surrounding woods as cover, they crept around the perimeter of the shop, staying low behind stripped car frames. Marcus reached the driver's side, quietly unhooked the battery charger Bill had attached, and slipped inside. Tessa slid into the passenger seat, pulling the door closed until the latch barely clicked.
Marcus turned the key. The engine cranked once, twice, then roared to life, coughing out a cloud of blue exhaust. "Get them!" someone screamed from the porch. Marcus slammed the transmission into reverse, smashing through Bill's wooden gate, then threw it into drive, flooring the accelerator. Bullets shattered the rear windshield, spraying safety glass over their laps, but the car gained traction, shooting down the muddy lane toward the state highway. Act V, the silence of Ironbark. They drove like hell through the blinding rain, the engine temp light flashing red, the radiator screaming in protest. They didn't stop until the narrow dirt road merged back onto the multi-lane concrete of Interstate 5. As dawn broke, casting a pale, gray light over the Pacific Northwest, Marcus pulled into a brightly lit truck stop 60 miles away. With shaking hands, Tessa dialed 911. 2 state troopers arrived an hour later. Marcus and Tessa recounted the entire harrowing night. The intentional detour, the fake service shops, the underground tunnels beneath the chapel, the town council meeting, and the hooded figures at Bill's property. The troopers listened quietly, taking notes with impassive faces. They promised a full investigation and dispatched a unit to inspect Scratch Creek and the lodge. 3 days later, the detective in charge called Marcus into the station. "We searched the entirety of Scratch Creek," the detective reported, sliding a folder across the desk. "The lodge is operational, managed by Mrs. Julia. She claims you stayed the night, suffered a severe panic attack, destroyed property in room 204, and fled into the woods. We found no tunnels under the chapel, only a standard root cellar. Mr. Bill reported his gate was damaged by a runaway vehicle, but denies any altercation. No hooded garments, no weapons, no evidence of foul play. They cleared it out." Tessa shouted, tears of frustration streaming down her face. "The deputy in that room was one of them. You're covering for them." The detective sighed, closing the file. "Without physical evidence or corroborating witnesses, there's nothing we can do, folks. My advice? Move on to your new home in Washington and leave Scratch Creek behind." Marcus held Tessa's hand tightly as they walked out of the police station into the crisp afternoon air. He knew the truth. Later research would reveal the dark history of Ironbark State Park. A history stretching back to the 1890s, filled with dozens of unexplained disappearances, vanished travelers, and undocumented settlements that legally did not exist on state maps. A dark lineage of isolated fanatics, protected by their own local law enforcement, sacrificing outsiders to an ancient entity beneath the timberlands. Marcus and Tessa survived the night at Scratch Creek. But whenever the sky turns gray and the fog rolls over the mountain pines, they know that deep in the woods of Ironbark, the old stock temple is still waiting for the next lost driver to turn off the highway.